So welcome everybody. I'm Liz Koch, and I've been playing with the core of the human organism for many years, about 45. As I've developed my work, I've come to some basic concepts that I'm going to present, and then we're going to go into movement for the rest of the time. So we have a container to work in. The concept I'm working with is core integrity. And what I've come to recognize, what I've been seeing for so long, came out through Resmaa's book. It, like, all of a sudden it hit me, was like, oh, that's what I'm seeing, because I'm seeing a frozenness in the white body. And I would say not only the idealized white body through the culture, but through things like fitness, through yoga, through dance, through these things where we're supposed to be improving ourselves, is holding the frozen body as the idealized white body. And that was an entry point, because I recognize in my own self that frozenness. And although I'm not seeking the idealized white body, I can still sense it. And so I had this awareness to start exploring that. I was working with it in myself, not as an idealized idea, but as looking for agency, for looking coherent, what I call coherency, which is the ability for my system to show up fully, not to be dissonant. And I keep hearing that word, how dissonant the white body is, and how hard it is to read, because it's not really, it's giving off different impressions. And I feel that as a white body meeting other white bodies, because I've been working with primal gesture. And I first started out as a conceptual artist. So I'm not a trainer. I have no degrees. I have no, I'm not in the therapeutic world. And so I'm not trying to fix anybody. I'm not trying to solve a problem. I was interested in creativity and what it was called in my early years, human potential. What is our human potential? And that has been what I've been tracking for these 45 years. So with that in mind, part of what started to show up was a need of what I call primal expression. They were expressions that was showing up in my tissue, and I started to follow them. And as I followed them, they led me into what I understand now is biomorphic movement. So biomorphic is a word that's used. It's movement that's shared with all life. Whatever organism you are, whatever system, living system you are, anything that is alive is a fluid organism. So I started to follow these fluid system, and I went in and actually learned to the portal into the fluid system, which is pre-nervous system. It's pre-conditioned. So before conditioning, we all shared this environment of fluid expression with all life, whether it's a river or a tree or an insect like a caterpillar or a human. So we're sharing a cosmic conversation as well as an earthly conversation, as well as a personal conversation. And so when we expand this band of information, we're beyond or in a field that is not about how the culture shapes us. And I found this very powerful for myself, to dissolve some of the stricture and what Resmaa called the bottlenecks of expression, and to create a capacity for coherency, so that what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, what I'm sensing is all one, like the animal body. So that what is happening in my head, my tail knows about, and what's happening in my tail, my head knows. So when we think about coherency, if you think of the wild animal, when the ears go back and the tail is tucked, we all know the expression is some kind of submission. There may be anger behind it, there may be fear, but there's some submission going on. When our tail is up and our ears are up and our eyes are open, there is we could grasp it, not just cognitively, but literally sensory wise. We start to feel the hair on our backs. We start to feel the sensory system show up, and we're reading coherency, whether that is, we perceive it as play because the tail is wagging and the ears are showing something, or if we see it as confrontation. These gestures, they're primal gestures, are coherent, but not in the human white body. They are not coherent. There is the ability for us to say one thing and feel something different and express it differently. So somewhere through our lineage, there's been a major disruption. And I would put that probably within the context of colonization, but obviously before. And Resmaa has tracked some of that trauma that is in the white body, as many others have. What has happened to us that has left us so frozen that we don't even know we're frozen. We don't even recognize it as a response to life itself. I also believe that currently we establish that individuation of body through the white colonization as individuation. So we are groomed to be individualized, which is why I consider birth a barbaric dimension in the medical establishment, because we are isolating mammals, and mammals don't do that. Mammals don't give birth in strange places with lights on. We have taken the animal body and distorted it to individuate it, to materialize it, to objectify it, to become the body of object. So I'm objectified as a body. I'm no longer a living process. So this can happen to anybody, whatever color skin, but we see the white body as the driving force towards this expression of individuation. We see it in separating mother and baby. We see it as, sleep training. We see it as, we see it throughout the culture of separating body from other bodies. But what we know in the realm of the nervous system is that mammals co-regulate. Their capacity to grow coherent is based on other bodies, and bodies that are more coherent than themselves. And so if each of us can find this ability to co-regulate, we are able to hold a space for someone else who has a younger or more undeveloped nervous system. And if we knew that, we wouldn't separate mammals from each other, and we wouldn't believe that if you individuate an infant, they will grow up better. No, they will grow up more colonized and separate and unable to feel any kind of empathy or response or know how to regulate their own nervous system. So those of us who have been able to start to regulate our nervous system, or if you're looking how to regulate your nervous system, and you didn't have those experiences that would enhance your experience as a living organism, then where you go is Mother Earth, because she is the larger co-regulator. So you will see that in children who have been traumatized at a young age. They will often, as adults, say, what saved me was a tree, was a rock, was being along this river. So they're entering into the biomorphic realm of where regulation is ultimately exists. So our story is that, Jaap van der Wal, who's an embryologist, an international Dutch embryologist who came out of retirement to teach people about the development of to take them out of the mechanistic model of body into a living process, would say we utilize cells to become. We're not made up of cells. We utilize cells to show up here on Earth. And our first story it happens in the beginning of the separation of the cell. And as it begins to individuate, as it begins to discern, there's part of us that comes out and embeds into our mother's womb. I call that a longing. It is a longing to show up here. And our first connection to Earth is the womb. So we each enter this field of Earth through our mother's womb. And that story shapes us. Her experience shapes us. So you see the ancestral story as it travels through what she's experiencing in the moment, what her life is about, and what her ancestors' lives are about. And also the DNA of the father. So we know that this story carries on. And so one of the things that we're working with is not only ourselves, but the generations before and the generations after. When we're able to understand that our way of showing up here is to be on the axis of our own organism, because that cellular story of development shows up as an organization around a field of energy called the axis or midline. This gives us a different way of understanding body than anatomy does, than looking at cadavers that are dead tissue. We're looking at living process. So that's what we're going to explore today, is our living process. And we're going to return to these primal gestures of how we showed up here. And by playing with them, just moving in them, and then pausing and giving ourselves some space to see what shows up, we can begin to feel this capacity to access something larger than ourselves, which might be community, but for me it was the connection first with the community of Earth. Before I could actually start to feel that I'm part of a community of white bodies, I actually have to land in the Earth. I have to feel myself connected to Earth, not moving through space as an object, but literally part of the living Earth, the elements of my being. So I have this axis or midline, and it has certain primal responses because it's a fluid system. I don't have a column as a spine. I have a living river as a spine. I have a caterpillar as a spine. And so like the living river, if it's frozen, you know, there is movement, but it's underneath that freeze. So we're dropping down under the freeze, looking for this biomorphic movement that is us. And that allows the freezing to dissolve. We don't have to go chip away at it. We can literally let it emerge like an underground spring. And when we join this living river of a spine, we also know that what shapes the river bed is the life force itself. There isn't a bed first and then the river follows it. It's emerging. And so this emergent movement isn't something I can say, oh, I need to do this movement and then this movement and then that movement. It's something that starts to show up in you. And some of the ways I have found to show up is just to follow, to uninhibit my system and trust that I'm a biointelligent being and that I can access these underground flows or movements. So what are they? They're waves, little undulations, spirals. So all living systems are fluid systems. That's what life is. It's a fluid conduit of electromagnetic fields in physics. So we're looking at accessing this axis of ourselves, this core of coherency through the fluids, which then reshape our tissue, which includes our brain. So all of a sudden we start thinking different. We have new thoughts. We have inspiration. And it's a felt sense. You can't get there through thinking about it. You get there through the creative process of recapitulation, of the way organisms keep restoring themselves, keep showing up. So I return is one of them. So in the embryological story, I'm using my hands as an example, we fold in and then we unfold. And we fold in and then we unfold. And so the story of life isn't just going forward. It's about returning and metabolizing or integrating our experiences, which then allow us to unfold again. This takes us out of a trauma response into restorative gestures. So these are also incredibly restorative. And we're trusting our biointelligence. And if we find a lot of dissonance or incoherency, my recommendation is to pause. My recommendation is to pause a lot anyways, because we're really doing a call and response to the biointelligence of the earth, maybe to the astral bodies. We're looking at our axis now co-regulating with the earth's axis. And so the more I can feel something deep in my bones, the more I land in my bones. So weight is one of the ways that helps me land in my bones, getting on the floor, being on the earth, putting my belly to a tree, literally sensing the earth helps me show up. And for many of us, we live in places, you know, on the 34th floor, or where there aren't, nature isn't present to me all the time. I'm not really sensing, smelling, feeling it in my isolated box. So we see we've created a culture that is also isolating and individuating. And so how do we re-enter this field is to land. And what I've wanted from this experience myself, my personal self, is I wanted us to go into this as a group, because I can do this on my own, but when I do it with a group, we are creating a field of coherency that we can actually, even on Zoom, feel, so that you're no longer sensing yourself as somehow, you're not objectifying yourself. You start to feel how you are part of this larger field, this coherency, and that you're contained like the fetus in the womb, in this womb that is also part of an axis of your mother, and she's connected to earth through the axis of the field of the earth. So we're in a larger relationship, and that relationship can keep opening up to be inclusive, so that there isn't something as other. There is differentiation, but there isn't this sense of lack of connection, which I think white bodies feel. I know I do a lot. So that's the premise of what we're doing and why we're doing what we're doing. So we're going to do some very simple movements that anyone can do. You can do it on a chair. I'm going to invite you to start on the chair, then move to the floor. And periodically, I will guide you through some ways that I work with biomorphic movement. But I'm also going to give you time where I'm quiet, so that you are in a process. You're not being led. You are tracking your own animal body. You are tracking this biointelligence that is you. And what I can tell you that I've learned is that the more you track your own animal body, the more you not only show up here on earth fully, the more agency you have to the audacity to be yourself. And you also start to feel that everyone else is there. And so you start to feel the inclusion of the field that you're in. So you become more aware, like the animal body's feet on the earth. You know, when my paws are feeling the earth, I am reading all that's going on. And so I'm waking up to all the other bodies, to all the other living systems. I become, I belong. So gravity, our capacity to show up in gravity, is our ability to belong. But our sense in our bones starts to connect to this field of belonging. And I feel like this is such an essential piece for many humans to access all life, to recognize all beings as having a level of consciousness, awareness, a sensitivity, a heartfelt connection. One of the things that Schnark was so about was the heart field, and that it's the heart field that takes us out of the cognitive tracking into this larger field of belonging, because our field of our heart literally goes beyond our physicality. And Heart Math is one of the people who have researched shows that, this field is at least 16 feet beyond us. So we're going into what's called the morphic field, the biomorphic field. And when we do that, we lose this sense of agency from the point of view of rigidity, but we actually fully flourish as who we are as living beings. So I find it really exciting. I hope you will too. And where we're going to begin is we're going to begin with working with any kind of gesture that's associated with fluid movement. So like a rock can be one. So we're going to begin on the chair, and then I will move it to the floor. And when I do, I'll take my headphones out, and so you'll probably hear me, but don't worry too much about tracking me visually for sure. You do get a video, so you can track it later if you want, but you'd be tracking my system. I want you to track your system. I want you to sense into your system. So even if the auditory, is, I'm going to talk loud so you can hear me, but even if you start going into a field of where you're not even interested in what I'm saying, you're already in this, that's okay. Like, know that we'll move you back into our group, but allow yourself this time to do that. So here's the idea. We're working with fluid movement, a rock. It could be an undulation. So a rock back and forth. It could be back. These are gestures that the spine, the living spine, does all the time. There's spirals. So it's not necessarily back and forth and side to side. We're working with the way water moves through a river that shapes the riverbank, but it also floods. And so we have to allow the movement not to be in a canal. When we canal ourselves, that is the deadening. That is the steel of spine that feels, that expresses nothing. That I consider the idealized white body. There's no expression there. And that shows us that we're in control. So we're going to dissolve that and go into something much deeper and powerful. This is where power really lies, in agency and the ability to show up fully, to feel completely, to actually be coherent. So let's start with a little rock and find what's right for you. And I would suggest on your chair to connect with bone, because bone connects with earth. So wherever you are, lean forward, pull your butt muscles out of the way so you actually feel those sits bones. And if your chair collapses, look around. There might be a book, use it, sit on it, use it as a support. So literally put it on so you can sense that you aren't just collapsing into nothingness. You're not dissolving into nothingness. You're actually rooted. You're rooting. Psoas is a lot about the rooting instincts of connecting with earth so that earth can reshape us. And it's where nourishment comes from, is from the earth. So we want to feel rooted here. So get on your sits bones, have your feet on the floor. I would recommend taking your shoes off. And leaning forward, getting on those sits bones. So pull any butt muscles and get on the edge of the chair, because the closer you are to the edge of the chair, the less you're going to use your leg and the more you're going to feel your core, this midline, this axis that we're going to play with, to return, to unfold back into this biointelligence and unfold and see what shows up between those two gestures. So there I am, kind of letting this falling. And I would encourage you to keep your eyes open, but soft. So you don't have to watch me on the screen. You can just hear my voice. And we're going to play with this letting go of rocking, because right at the solar plexus, where your upper psoas is and the diaphragm is one of the places we learn very young to stop feeling, to control our feelings, to not be overwhelmed, to surprise, to show up and be what someone else wants you to be, where goodness is born out of the white body, where we're disconnected, but we're so good. All these different ways of being that we have learned, the lift, the lift of the good posture is in the upper psoas. And the upper psoas diaphragm is also where the vagus, the soul nerve, comes down into the belly core, the wandering nerve. So we're looking at an area that is a lot about our will center. The kidneys ride there, the adrenals are on top of that. So survival as well as thriving is here. And so we want, as we start this little rock, to see if we can soften that area and feel into our bones of our feet and our pelvis. And the soft eyes is so that you don't disappear. You don't have to shut out the world to sense yourself. To be fully sensory and awake is to also allow the room. So feel the room, and if you need to locate in the room, let it be a little spiral. Let your pelvis stay, rotate around the stayed leg. So your feet are planted, but now you rotate and you look around, but you don't just look, let it come in. You drink in the room you're in. You allow what's here to be brought in and included into your experience of the space that you're occupying right now. And the back field, the back body, as I sway, is also falling, and I can sense how far it goes. If you have windows, let your eyes track out as far as they can. So you also see the expansive, that there's something larger than the field, the room you're occupying right now. And then let your eyes just blink a couple times as you leave them open and soft. If you have glasses, take them off so that and when you play with this other times, take contacts out, anything that interferes with your central nervous system, so that this little wave, this rock, is an invitation that allows you to begin to access this deeper core intelligence, what I call bio-intelligence. Rather than being a biomechanical creature, you are a bio-intelligent creature. And now, as you play with this, and you can change it, you can rock in different ways. See if you can find a movement that feels more like seaweed that you've seen in water, or a plant that's being moved by the river, where it undulates in ways that aren't linear. Along with humming and very simple sounds, I really like the long ha, which is opening your mouth and just an exhale, like air moving through a tunnel. You could close your lips and inhale through your nose. But the long ha brings us into softening the jaw and noticing our tongue, which is the portal to the fluid system. So take your tongue, wherever it is, if it's stuck to the roof of your mouth, let it float in the fluids of your mouth. Just be aware of your tongue. What does it want to do? What does it like to do? Where does it like to go? As you still continue to kind of play with rocking and undulating and spiraling. You might notice your system starting to collapse or move into a curl. So allow your spine to do that. Let it curl into what's called the primal C. That's a return. It's a returning gesture. You might notice it wants to go into an arc. So as I fall forward, I notice my tail stops being tucked and it starts to float. So now I can connect my tail to my tongue. My eyes are just floating, so I'm not keeping them tight. The eyelids are are kind of fluttering. Because I'm not really using my eyes for seeing, but I'm not closing off the world either. So I can sense the light and stay where I am. I'm not disappearing. I'm enfolding. I'm returning. I might be collapsing. I might find myself to be terribly exhausted by holding myself up. So I'm returning to the earth. Feel the feet as you collapse, as your spine, wiggle your toes a little bit to connect to your feet. So as you're playing with this rock, these simple undulations, this expression of a fetal curl in many ways, we're returning to something we all know. We all grew in the shape of the C, in this curl, and we unfurled in some way as we emerged onto the earth. Some of us came in very startled. Some of us came in nourished and supported so we could unfurl after we arrived, slowly and in our own timing. But that's not the experience many of us have. Many of us have been pulled out, and our system has opened very quickly, and in a reaction of fear and startle and maybe freeze. So just allow the letting go, the collapse to be okay, to round, to give up, to dissolve into your feet, into this weight that is connected. Even if you're on a floor, sense how the building connects to the earth. So let the weight pass through the structure you're in, the building you're in, into the actual earth field. And now let's take this down to the floor. And I suggest doing it gently. You could even find your way down there, kind of like a caterpillar curling. I'm going to change my sound now. So I'm going to begin on the floor on my back. And I'm going to be in what is often called constructive rest. So I'm just landing here, sensing my whole spine, head to pelvis. My feet are still on the floor. And it's also a baseline for what we're doing. So later you actually can notice how has this connection to ground changed from playing with these very simple gestures of movement. So here I am resting on the floor, my bones have landed, and gravity is reshaping me. At first, I might feel how pulled off away from the floor I am, and that's okay. Don't change that. Just be with it. Be with whatever is showing up for you right now. Don't try to self-correct in that, oh, I shouldn't be here, or no shoulds. Don't should on yourself. Just sense, wait, where do you connect to the earth? Where does that happen? Where in you right now do you feel connection? And let's allow the eyes that have been on the screen to start to dissolve, that tension of staring at a screen, which is part of Resmaa. So we're going to just rub our hands together. and place your stimulated palms over your eyes. And drop that darkness, that nourishment of energy. Let it soften, or just feel the energy and how your eyes receive that energy. Taking your palms away and the eyes soft, let them drift. Can drift anywhere they want. You may not know how to do that yet, but you're going to learn to drift, which means the eyes are no longer the focus of my attention. So you could let them drift off to the left as far as they want to drift, as if you were a pool of a living river and your eyes were pooling out all along your side body. My eyelids aren't open, they're soft, they're quivering. I'm no longer controlling my eyes. And they can drift up, way up, can meander up past my head and all the way down past my toes, wherever they want to drift. I'm uninhibiting my eyes. And they can drift off to the right. It doesn't matter which side you choose first. You're just letting them drift. And again, pooling and spreading, going beyond your body, past your head if you were looking, but you're not. You're just letting your eyes uninhibit. And all the way back, flooding down past your toes. Let them drift wherever they want to go. And the expression of the eyes might change the movement along your spine. So welcome that. Welcome whatever movements show up. Don't stay quiet. Let yourself express itself. Let the biomorphic movements of life move you, move your tissue. And whenever you want, you can just move your eyelids, like just blink a few times. And that will change everything. Notice what your impulse is. I'm learning to follow my impulses, not control them in a structured way. So I want to actually notice. I may have an impulse to roll to my side. I might have an impulse to lift my legs and grab my ankles or hold my knees, or whatever your arms might want to wrap around your hands might want to wrap around your arms and gently rock. So whatever is showing up, I'm not going to guide your movements. I'm going to just let you know that all of that is absolutely wonderful. Like a baby on its back. You once were this living biomorphic expression, and you can return to that now. Notice the inhibition, how it wants to maybe say, no, don't do that, that's not okay. So just drop a little deeper under that rigidity into what is the impulse that's craving or longing to become. If it feels overwhelming, that's where your pillow or hassock or whatever you have around the blanket, you could place that between your legs and wrap your arms around it, either on your side or on your back, and allow the rock to continue somewhere. Can you find any movement between your tongue and your tail? See if you can find that tongue to tail river of life that is you. And if there isn't any, if you notice, wow, there is no movement, there is a freeze, then just go into even a smaller movement and a longer ha as an exhale. Micro movements. A flutter of an eye, a movement of a toe. Where is life showing up in you? Another sound I like to play with when I find fetal curl showing up is, so if there's a curve, if you're closing in, if you're having the impulse of getting smaller, follow that, and you can play with a sound of like a soft shushing sound, SH. But rather than push, let it be like a little leak that's very, very long, almost inaudible to your ears. Any sound, whatever shows up, you can play with that. Your sound is off, you're muted, you can play with any sound. But I love the sound because there's something that dissolves in that soft, long exhale. And when I go into a pause, which I invite you to do, is in the pause is where your own intelligence starts to show up. Like a call, the response is fluid movement that you aren't orchestrating, you aren't making happen. It's starting to show up. So I invite the movement through a little rock, but then I pause, or through the sound and then a little pause. And it's in your pause
where you're open, you're tracking your own intelligence, you're observing your own nervous system. And you might find yourself uncurling. You might find yourself going in a very different movement, or you might find yourself curling more. These are living, emerging expressions. So you don't know. You're not exercising. You're allowing. And this allowing, we don't know what's going to show up. We're in the unknown. But I'm curious. And the pause is the curious. I'm curious. What will show up? You feel frozen, wiggle your toes. Just like when they start to get numb, wiggle your toes and your fingers. It can often help you to access something below that freeze. Along with the curling is also the impulse to arc or open. You might feel that has more richness for you, a desire to arc, to get bigger, to actually fill your molecular space. So if that's where you're going, I'm going to lead you through one way of playing with that. And if you're in a process of curling in and that's feeling very nourishing, I invite you to follow what is real for you, what feels authentic. But what's authentic is this arcing, this warding off, or even a startle response is showing up. Then playing with the hiss can be very powerful. So I allow my voice to become part of the opening, my whole throat. So if I kind of stroke the tissue behind the ear and down along the throat into the sternum and feel the lift of the sternum, the heart back up into the throat through touch. I can start to connect to this opening that I have something to say. There's something to be understood through expression of the mouth and the tongue, that the tongue holds my primalness, and the tail and the tongue are going to go away from each other into this arc. And so you might find your pelvis arcing or flexing. You might find your spine lifting into that arc. And in many of us, that has been pulled out of us, that has been controlled and locked down. So this expression of getting bigger has been taken away. So allow yourself to play with that if that's what's showing up. You have to follow what is showing up. When I do that, my arms often want to go above my head and my hands want to open up, and my eyes can, just following my hands, open that throat. And so I'm in this exposed but also open, extended place in myself. And I use the hiss. And I encourage you, if you play with the hiss, to just do a few of them and then pause. So you're not doing a mantra. There's nothing you're repeating. You're allowing a vibration into your tissue and then through the hiss. And the hiss is forceful, unlike the shh. It's not soft. It's forceful. It's powerful. It might be saying back off. It might be saying this is my space. So we're allowing the hiss to vibrate all the tissue. If you find yourself in the arc, feel the back body. Let it hang. Let the ribs hang with gravity. Find that little lateral fish movement of the tongue and the tail. Play with the hiss. So if it feels like a freeze or a reactive gesture, then just stay there with it and let sound move the frozen tissue. If you're shaking or feeling overwhelmed, roll to your belly. Grab that blanket and wrap it around, or the pillow or cushion. Put it on the front body. Give it weight. Let it just land you.
And wherever you are in your experience, I invite you to return to constructive rest. So return to this idea of just landing in your bones, your feet on the floor, into a place of return. I'm going to call Resmaa back to us.